There is a peculiar truth about human nature. People rarely understand the depth of their own emotions. What is felt most intensely is often what is most deeply buried. And nowhere is this more evident than in love that remains unrecognized, even by the one who feels it. If he does this, if he moves closer, then suddenly withdraws, you may be tempted to believe it is indifference. But indifference is consistent. Indifference does not hesitate, does not return, does not linger in invisible ways. What you are witnessing is not a lack of feeling, but a confrontation with it. A man who is only mildly interested will remain simple, predictable, and easy to understand. But a man who is deeply affected by you becomes complicated. He contradicts himself. He says less than he feels, yet reveals more than he intends. His behavior becomes a language his conscious mind cannot fully control. When he finds reasons to reconnect even after distance, it is not coincidence. The unconscious does not forget what matters. It pulls him back again and again toward what he cannot resolve within himself. Watch closely, not what he says, but what he does without realizing. Does he remember small details? Does he react emotionally in subtle ways? Does your absence change his behavior even slightly? These are not conscious choices. These are reflections of something far deeper. Often he will not call it love. In fact, he may resist that word entirely, because to name it would require him to face vulnerability, and vulnerability demands surrender. So instead he hesitates, he delays, he creates distance, not because he feels nothing, but because he feels too much. This is the paradox. The stronger the feeling, the greater the resistance to it. What appears as confusion is often a defense. What appears as inconsistency is often a struggle. And what appears as emotional distance can be the very sign that something within him is trying to protect itself from being overwhelmed. So if he does this, if he returns when he has every reason not to, if he watches from a distance, if he reacts in ways that seem disproportionate, understand this. He is not untouched. He is in fact deeply affected, more than he realizes, more than he is ready to admit. And sometimes the truest form of love is not the one that is confidently declared, but the one that quietly shapes behavior, disturbs inner peace, and refuses to disappear no matter how much it is denied. The unconscious speaks in a language that bypasses intention and exposes truth without permission. It does not rely on carefully chosen words or polished explanations because it operates beneath the surface where authenticity cannot be filtered or controlled. While the conscious mind edits, suppresses, and reshapes reality to maintain comfort and order, the unconscious expresses itself through behavior, tone, timing, and subtle emotional reactions that reveal what is genuinely felt. A person may say they are indifferent, yet their actions betray a different reality. They may claim distance, yet consistently find their way back. These contradictions are not accidents. They are manifestations of an inner world that refuses to remain hidden. The unconscious does not align itself with logic or social expectations. Instead, it pushes forward fragments of truth through gestures, pauses, and inconsistencies that escape conscious awareness. This is why actions often carry more weight than declarations. Words can be constructed to protect the ego, to avoid vulnerability, or to maintain a certain image. But behavior, especially repeated behavior, is far more difficult to disguise. It reflects patterns driven by emotional imprints, unresolved conflicts, and desires that have not been fully acknowledged. When someone acts in ways that contradict what they claim, it is not confusion, it is revelation. The unconscious also reveals itself in moments of emotional intensity. Overreactions, sudden withdrawals, unexpected returns, these are not random. They are signals of something deeper trying to surface. What cannot be comfortably expressed in words emerges through these disruptions, often surprising even the person experiencing them. In this way, the unconscious bypasses resistance and forces truth into the open, even if it appears distorted. To understand someone, it becomes necessary to observe not what they intend to show, but what they unintentionally reveal. The way they respond under pressure, the patterns they repeat, the emotions they cannot fully conceal, these form a more accurate portrait than any spoken explanation. The unconscious does not lie, because it does not strategize. It simply expresses. And within these expressions lies a deeper reality, one that often contradicts the narrative presented on the surface. Emotional contradiction is often misunderstood as inconsistency or lack of clarity, yet it frequently points to something far more complex beneath the surface. When a person moves closer and then pulls away, expresses warmth and then becomes distant, It is easy to assume uncertainty or disinterest, but emotional life is rarely that simple. What appears contradictory on the outside can be the visible expression of an internal struggle that has not yet found resolution. Depth of feeling does not always translate into smooth or predictable behavior. In fact, the stronger the emotion, the more likely it is to create tension within the individual experiencing it. One part seeks connection, closeness, and expression, while another part resists, fearing vulnerability, loss of control, or emotional exposure. These opposing forces do not cancel each other out, they coexist, creating patterns that seem confusing but are deeply meaningful. A person who feels very little tends to behave in a straightforward way. Their actions align easily with their words because there is no significant internal resistance. But when feelings are intense, they often collide with fears, past experiences, and unconscious defenses. This collision produces contradiction. It is not a sign of emptiness, but of inner complexity. Moments of withdrawal following closeness can reflect an attempt to regain emotional balance. Sudden distance after vulnerability may arise from a need to protect oneself from being overwhelmed. These shifts are not necessarily calculated decisions, they are responses driven by layers of the psyche that operate beyond full awareness. The individual may not fully understand why they behave this way, only that something within them compels it. Contradiction also reveals the presence of unresolved emotions. When someone cannot fully accept or integrate what they feel, it emerges in fragmented ways. They may express care indirectly, avoid direct acknowledgement, or create space, even when connection is desired. This fragmentation is not the absence of feeling, but evidence that the feeling is too significant to be easily contained or expressed. To interpret emotional contradiction accurately requires looking beyond surface behavior and recognizing the tension that drives it. What seems like mixed signals may actually be a sign that the person is navigating something internally that holds genuine weight. The push and pull, the closeness and distance, are not random patterns but reflections of an inner world attempting to reconcile itself. Projection is one of the most subtle and powerful mechanisms of the psyche, shaping perception in ways that often go unnoticed. It occurs when a person unconsciously places their own feelings, desires, or conflicts onto someone else, experiencing them as if they originate outside rather than within. In matters of love, this process can create a form of hidden devotion, one that is deeply felt but rarely recognized for what it truly is. A person may believe they are simply intrigued, curious, or even irritated by someone, yet beneath these surface interpretations lies an unacknowledged emotional investment. Instead of recognizing the depth of their attachment, they project it outward, attributing intensity to the other person rather than to their own inner experience. What they cannot consciously accept becomes something they perceive as coming from outside, distorting clarity while preserving emotional safety. This is why strong reactions often signal more than they appear. Unusual fascination, persistent thoughts, or disproportionate emotional responses are rarely accidental. They point to something within seeking recognition. Yet the ego resists this awareness, especially when it threatens stability or demands vulnerability. Projection becomes a compromise, allowing the feeling to exist, but in a disguised and displaced form. Hidden devotion takes shape in these moments. A person may deny affection while continuously focusing on the other. They may question intentions, analyze behavior, or create narratives that keep the connection alive in their mind, all while insisting that their interest is minimal or purely intellectual. In reality, the energy invested reveals a deeper truth. Attention itself becomes a form of attachment, even when it is masked as something else. Projection also protects the individual from confronting the implications of their own feelings. To acknowledge genuine attachment would require openness, risk, and the possibility of rejection. By externalizing the emotion, they maintain a sense of control, avoiding direct engagement with what they feel. Yet the unconscious does not remain silent. It continues to express devotion indirectly through repeated focus, emotional reactions, and an inability to fully detach. Understanding this dynamic requires looking beyond stated intentions and observing where energy is consistently directed. What occupies the mind, what provokes emotion, what refuses to fade, these are not random occurrences. They are reflections of an inner attachment that has not yet been consciously claimed. Silence is often misinterpreted as absence, yet in the realm of human emotion, it can carry a density that words fail to contain. What is not spoken is not necessarily what is not felt. In many cases, silence becomes the space where emotions gather, intensify, and remain unexpressed, not because they are weak, but because they are too complex or overwhelming to articulate. Words require clarity, structure, and a certain level of conscious understanding. But not all feelings exist in a form that can be easily translated into language. Some emotions are layered, conflicted, or still in the process of becoming known, even to the person experiencing them. In such cases, silence is not avoidance in its simplest sense, but a reflection of something that has not yet found its way into expression. There are moments when speaking would demand vulnerability that the individual is not prepared to face. To put the emotion into words is to define it, and to define it is to confront its reality. Silence, then, becomes a form of protection. It allows the feeling to exist without forcing it into a form that would require acknowledgement, responsibility, or exposure. At times, silence also holds intensity that exceeds what language can convey. A lingering look, a delayed response, an absence that feels charged rather than empty. These are not neutral experiences. They are filled with meaning, often more than a direct statement could communicate. What is withheld gains weight. Precisely because it is not released, it remains present, unresolved, and therefore powerful. Repetition of silence can further reveal its significance. When someone consistently chooses not to speak in moments where expression would be expected, it suggests an internal barrier rather than indifference. Indifference tends to move on, to disengage without hesitation, but silence that persists often signals that something remains active beneath the surface, something that has not been resolved or dismissed. To understand silence requires attention to context, patterns, and subtle cues. It is not the absence of communication, but a different form of it, one that operates without words yet still conveys emotional truth. The tone of silence, its timing, and its consistency all reveal layers of meaning that spoken language may obscure. Within silence lies a paradox. What is unspoken can often be more revealing than what is openly declared, carrying an emotional depth that resists simplification and remains present even without expression. Fear of vulnerability does not weaken attachment, it often deepens it in ways that remain hidden from immediate awareness. When a person feels the pull of genuine connection, it brings with it a sense of exposure, a recognition that something meaningful could be gained but also lost. This awareness activates protective mechanisms within the psyche, creating resistance that exists alongside desire rather than replacing it. The more significant the emotional bond, the greater the perceived risk. Vulnerability requires openness, and openness removes the illusion of control. For many, this is not a comfortable position. It challenges the structures they have built to maintain stability, independence, or emotional safety. As a result, instead of moving directly toward what they feel, they hesitate, withdraw, or create distance, not because the attachment is weak, but because it is powerful enough to unsettle their internal balance. This tension between longing and fear generates a heightened state of awareness around the connection. The person becomes more attentive, more affected, and often more reactive, even if they attempt to conceal it. What they resist begins to occupy more mental and emotional space. The effort to suppress or control the feeling does not eliminate it, it amplifies its presence beneath the surface. Avoidance can become a strategy, but it rarely leads to detachment. Instead, it creates a cycle where the connection is repeatedly approached and then retreated from, reinforcing its significance each time. The individual may try to rationalize their behavior, attributing it to uncertainty or external circumstances, yet the underlying force remains the same. Something within them recognizes the depth of the attachment, even if they are not fully willing to accept it consciously. Fear of vulnerability also distorts expression. Rather than communicating openly, the person may show care indirectly through actions that seem inconsistent or difficult to interpret. They may hold back words, delay responses, or maintain emotional distance while still remaining connected in less obvious ways. These behaviors are not signs of indifference, but reflections of an internal struggle between the desire to connect and the need to protect oneself from emotional exposure. To observe this dynamic is to recognize that intensity often hides behind restraint. What is avoided is not always what is unimportant, but often what carries the greatest emotional weight, creating an attachment that grows stronger precisely because it is resisted. Inconsistency is often interpreted as a lack of care, a sign that emotions are shallow or unreliable, yet human behavior is rarely that linear. When patterns shift between closeness and distance, presence and absence, it can reflect not an absence of feeling, but the presence of an internal conflict that has not yet found resolution. What appears unstable on the surface may be the visible expression of a deeper psychological tension. A person who feels little tends to behave in predictable ways. Their actions align with their intentions because there is no significant emotional resistance within them. But when feelings are strong, they rarely exist in isolation. They encounter fear, past conditioning, unresolved experiences, and unconscious defenses that complicate their expression. This collision creates inconsistency, not as a strategy, but as a byproduct of inner division. Moments of warmth followed by withdrawal can signal an attempt to regulate emotional intensity. When connection becomes too real, it can trigger a need to regain control, to step back from something that feels overwhelming. This retreat is not necessarily a rejection of the bond, but a response to the pressure it creates internally. The individual moves closer when the desire for connection becomes stronger, and pulls away when the fear of vulnerability rises to meet it. Such patterns are rarely fully understood by the person experiencing them. They may struggle to explain their own behavior, offering reasons that only partially capture what is happening beneath the surface. The unconscious plays a significant role here, influencing reactions in ways that bypass deliberate choice. What emerges outwardly is a sequence of actions that seem contradictory, yet are tied together by a single unresolved tension. Inconsistency also reveals that something meaningful is at stake. Indifference does not fluctuate, it remains steady in its absence of investment. But when someone alternates between engagement and distance, it suggests that the connection continues to hold psychological weight. The difficulty lies not in feeling nothing, but in managing what is felt. To interpret inconsistency accurately requires looking beyond immediate reactions and considering the underlying struggle. What appears as mixed signals may be the outward sign of an inner process still unfolding, where emotion and defense coexist, shaping behavior in ways that resist simplicity.